Hello! Welcome to Impersonal Opinion, the show where we don't take our opinions personally. I'm Chandler Klebs, and I'm here with Ronnie, George, Jamie, and David, and we're going to be talking about paradoxes. And from what I understand, Ronnie is looking up the definition of what a paradox is, and we can talk about the various paradoxes um, and because Ronnie is very paradoxical, and so she has these very interesting Facebook posts I read, but I'm sure we all have paradoxes that we know about. So, Ronnie, do you have that definition available?
I do.
All right, continue with that.
All right. A paradox is a statement or proposition that, despite sound or apparently sound reasoning from acceptable premises, leads to a conclusion that seems senseless, logically unacceptable, or self-contradictory.
Yeah,
Can uh, can someone give me an example then, please? Okay.
I can give you an example. Give me just a second. Okay.
All
Have
right.
you ever heard the Have you ever read the line? Actually, you know what? I can just say the line, and
Yeah.
you'll understand why it's a paradox. This
Okay.
statement is false.
well,
Okay. Yeah.
what? Okay, the statement is false.
This
So,
statement is false. That's called the liar's paradox, I believe. Because if it's true, then it's false. If it's false,
wow. I know about the grandfather paradox.
is that the time traveling one?
Yeah, it's really funny. Do you want me to tell our audience what the grandfather paradox is?
Sure.
You could tell me as well. I'm going to be slow to catch up on this one.
Okay. Well, basically, from how I read it on Wikipedia, is the grandfather paradox is basically where somebody they go back in time and kill their own grandfather. But the problem with this, and I don't know why somebody would kill their grandfather because that's not very nice.
Maybe your grandfather was Hitler. I mean,
Yeah. Okay, so let's suppose that you go back way in time and you kill your grandfather, but because your grandfather is one of your ancestors, and by them being killed, it leads to an alternate universe where you were never born. Because if your grandfather was killed before they reproduced enough to make your father or your mother, well then you don't exist. So in other words, you didn't exist to be able to go back in time and kill your grandfather. And this is one of the problems that would come up if time travel were possible.
So that's a bit like the Terminator storyline, isn't it? It's the idea that they're coming back in time to kill John Connor, but if they didn't come back in time, then the Terminators wouldn't exist anyway. So they need John Connor to exist in order to kill him. You'd understand if you've seen the movies.
Well, I've seen Back to the Future, which has a similar situation, because you know where Marty he runs into his parents, and then his mom has the hots for him instead of his father, and so Marty has to get his parents back together in love, or he's wiped out of existence. And anybody who hasn't seen Back to the Future should totally see the first of that series because it has that whole story. But that's a paradox.
Okay, so can you tell me if like I don't believe in ghosts, but when I watch a horror film, I still get scared. That's not a paradox, is it? That's just like cognitive dissonance.
Well,
tend to fear the unknown, and so if you can't really, it may not necessarily be you might not believe in ghosts, but you might not know that there aren't ghosts, and so there's a possibility then that there are ghosts, and so there's that unknown possibility, which is probably why you get scared. And also there's psychological stuff when it comes to sound. The sound that they use when they have these shows will make you more likely to feel like jittery, like.
Yeah, so I'm gonna be scared. Yeah.
Yeah, well, you know what, David? When you see something scary, whether it's real or not, when you're seeing it in a movie, it is real to you at that time and can really scare you.
Yeah, and plus the fear response and all that stuff. A lot of this has to do with the subconscious, doesn't it, George?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the unconscious, like, it's, I mean, like this, we talk about a lot in relative to free will. Like any kind of thought we have, any decision we make is actually being made by the unconscious. So I don't know if that qualifies as a paradox. But yeah, no, because like all the data by which we make decisions and the principles by which we make decisions and the process of decision making, that's all in the unconscious. So absolutely.
And it's good to have a fear center too, because if you don't have a fear center, you're more likely to take risks that result in death, criminal offending, and stuff like that.
Yeah. And I think it could be said that belief in free will is sort of a paradox, and I'm sure some of you would understand this, because the idea that people think that they're making decisions, that they're consciously just freely deciding their destiny, and yet everything has to stem from prior causes, or for the indeterminists, randomness, and yet they still believe that they're in control. So that's kind of a paradox too, isn't it?
Yeah, and I'm wondering even like if the concept free will, yeah, in other words, like free will, relative determinism, like people say that like, well, we caused our free will decision, so like it's a paradox that the causality that kind of like that free will requires is the same causality that makes free will impossible. In other words, there can't be a free will without, our causing, a free will decision. But if we say that, then like the causality just like, refutes free will.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
the only way free will can be possible is if people can literally make decisions out of nothing. But we know by, certain principles.
I think that's a really, I don't know that I agree with that. I the concept of free will is simply the ability to make decisions, and it is not anything more, and it is not anything less.
No, Ronnie, it's like because like we all make decisions. So like, if that was the case, there'd be no debate. It's so clear that we all make decisions. And actually, it also depends on how we define decision, because like for example, a computer, comes up with answers, like that seem like decisions, but they're actually all programmed. So in other words, like let's
Well,
say we
right,
make
human beings are not computers.
no, but my point is that like if human beings make a decision, but if that decision is caused by this chain of cause and effect that regresses behind everything, then actually it's not really our decision. We're making the decision, but it's not ours, or we're kind of like manifesting it.
What George is trying to say is that we're basically byproducts of evolution. We only know morality because we were taught it.
Oh, I wasn't talking about morality. You don't have to necessarily.
Well, morality has a lot to do with the free will debate. So.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of an interesting thing because it is a good paradox, and so it's interesting because basically the way I like to say it is, well, we don't control what our decisions are. We don't choose our choices. We don't decide the outcome of our decisions.
You don't choose the consequences, but you know that there are consequences. That's a cause and effect thing, not a free will thing.
Well, this is very interesting because if like upon what basis do you decide your actions? That's the key issue.
Well,
Yeah,
free
but
will
your
isn't
decisions.
about going back and finding out so much why you make a decision. Free will is simply asking whether or not you can make decisions. So if you can choose something over another thing, then you have free will.
Well, I think that I think that would just be classed as will and not free
No,
will.
free will is the ability to make decisions. Will itself is simply a desire.
Now, Ronnie, free will, in other words, like it's like a decision that would be freely made would be made free of factors.
No, that's not necessarily true. Because we're all bound by our factors and our limitations, but we're free to act within them.
Well, even that, again, like when we use it, again, this is according to, like, for example, St. Augustine coined the term free will. And so, like, he basically used it to hold human beings responsible for the evil that we do. In other words, like, because he wanted to absolve God. He wanted, like, to consider God as good. And so God being incapable of doing evil. So then he said, well, human beings are free to choose what to do independent of God's, let's say, omnipotence. So freedom always, within this context, relates to factors that are not within a human's control.
Yeah, that's the libertarian definition of free will.
Well,
I mean, I think what she's saying is she's using the compatibilist definition of free will. You know, we're still
yeah, I'm
got.
using a very basic definition, a very general definition of free will that is simply that you have the ability to make decisions.
No,
Like,
I know.
there's actually a paradox. Well, you could call it a paradox. There's actually a little puzzle that regards free will. It was meant to be satirical to those who believe that we do not have free will. And I believe Aristotle was the one who first came up with it, but there's another version of it. Let me pull it up. It's called something about an ass. And when I say ass, I mean donkey.
Oh, burden's ass, like you
Bird's
have.
ass.
Sure, that's you've got an ass, basically donkey, whatever, equidistant between two bales of hay, incapable of deciding which one to eat, right?
Yeah, it says the donkey has been programmed to follow strict deterministic rules in choosing which bale of hay to eat. The trouble is there is nothing in the donkey's past, nor in the situation in front of him, that enables the algorithm governing his behavior to select between the two bales of hay. It follows, then, that the donkey will stand in front of the hay trapped in indecision until he starves to death.
All right, but I would reject that in other words because like the donkey has kind of like a motivation to eat, right? In other words,
Right.
like the donkey will get increasingly
So
hungry,
he's going to choose.
right?
At some point, he's going to choose one of those bales of hay. But if he does that, then he's making a decision that he was apparently not able to make.
Right, but that's what I would reject the idea that he's apparently not able to make it because like
That's the
while
point. If he's able to make a decision, then he has free will. And if he's not able to make the decision, then he has determined will.
no
Well, no,
no
the reason why we make decisions in the first place is because we're weighing the pros and cons. Say, like in a survival
Right,
situation.
and that's how you make decisions.
so in
And
Yeah,
if
other
he
words like
has to choose,
if you're gonna
Ronnie, in
die,
other words the
dead.
donkey's decision in this case would be whether to eat or not, because like there's two decisions, which bale of hay and then whether to
well,
eat. So like
he knows that he wants to eat. He just doesn't know which bale to eat.
all right, so it's in other
Uh,
words like if
Aristotle put this one in a different way, and I think it's a little bit better. Let's say that a man is equally hungry and thirsty, and he is in the middle of food and drink.
It's still the hedonic principle because they're going towards pleasure and away from pain.
Well, it says he's equally hungry and thirsty, so.
and actually sometimes like they're like for example like they'll have people decide whether to choose an item on the left or an item on the right or an item on top or an item on the bottom, and actually
Right.
based on our personality, based on our genetics, we're predisposed to like choose right rather than left or top rather than
But
bottom. So
if
like
you're,
so that
let's say you are predisposed to that. Let's say, for example, we used this example last time, pizza, because pizza. I can choose, even though I am predisposed, my taste buds are predisposed to like certain types of pizzas. I can choose to eat a type of pizza that I do not like.
right,
I
but
can
again
choose
like
to do that.
you can choose, but relative to the free will question, you can't make that choice without
No, I
having it.
can't make my tongue a certain way,
No,
but
Ronnie,
I can still choose to eat whichever pizza I like.
Ronnie, my point is you can't make that choice without that choice having been caused. So like once we establish that, then we also establish that everything has a cause. So basically the reason why you chose, the food you chose was because of this chain of cause and effect that regresses back to before you were born. So that's why, the decision isn't free of factors outside of our control.
Well, no. Free will is not being able to control everything. Free will does not have that power. Free
Well,
will is simply, at its basic form, is the ability to make decisions.
but Ronnie, I mean, like, that's the compatibilist redefinition of free will because the free will debate goes before that. In other words, like when the Greeks discussed it, they had words for fate and destiny. They had no words for either will nor free will because it was like their understanding that everything was destined. So this debate actually came into being, because obviously people would say, sure, we make decisions all the time, but we're only speaking colloquially. The debate about free will is like, it's, you look it up in Stanford Encyclopedia of philosophy, in wiki, the key factor of the debate has always been, factors outside of our control. Now, people like Daniel Dennett and others and Kant, who couldn't accept that, they redefined the term outside of the original debate in order to kind of like say we have a free will, but it's really a straw man argument. It's kind of like
How
using
is
the
it?
term.
It's okay to redefine things sometimes. Sometimes.
Well, I mean,
If
but
there
like,
is, obviously there are
Yeah, but
millions, billions of people who believe in free will.
no,
And
but
so
again,
obviously there's a foundation for that.
but Ronnie,
but
for example, like here in the United States, people believe they have a free will because like our laws allow them to, like, they say they have more free will here in the United States
Oh,
than
no,
like
no,
in
no,
another
no.
country. So like
No.
a lot of
Free
people
will's not
actually.
based on laws.
No, I know. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying that a lot of people have a misconception of what the philosophical debate about free will has been about.
Yeah. Yeah. See, what I wanted to clarify is people are confused about what free will means because they're told
Precisely.
different definitions.
You can't just change definitions to suit you all the
Right.
time.
This is true.
Confuses
But
me.
like I said, the definition of free will is simply the ability to make decisions.
Ronnie, go to Wiki and read us what Wiki says about this.
Okay.
Georgia, I think you're echoing.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, we are echoing. I'm not sure how to.
Yeah, all of us are echoing a little bit, which is kind of strange. But yeah, the debate has gotten confused because compatibilism is more of a modern thing, from my understanding. Because originally, the free will debate, especially within Christianity, is about whether you have the kind of freedom of choice that allows you to deserve heaven or hell.
So, here's a quick question.
Misnomer in a
If we
dictionary.
assume that determinism is correct and true, what are you going to do about it?
Well, the idea, Ronnie, the reason we do these podcasts and the shows and write the books is because when we know that nobody is like fundamentally morally responsible for what we do, we can treat them with more compassion, with more understanding. We don't blame people. We don't blame ourselves. It really creates a better world.
That seems okay. But what are you going to do?
Well,
I
we're
mean,
gonna teach. Go ahead.
are you going to keep making choices?
Well, we're going to make choices, but actually, most technically, all right, the difference between a computer and a human being is essentially that a human being is conscious, but like a computer and a human being are both subject to the same causal principle that makes choices actually impossible. Because, like, again, if we're quote unquote choosing, but because this quote unquote choice has a causal regression, this chain of cause and effect behind it that regresses that back to before we were born, it's really not technically a choice. We never technically choose. We just use the word as a convention.
Right. I like to just call it like a behavior or an action or something along those lines.
So nobody's morally responsible for what they do?
Correct.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, basically, this is the heart of the matter, Ronnie.
If nobody is morally responsible for what they do, then you cannot hold anything that anybody does against them.
Correct.
Which means you cannot sue somebody who set your house on fire because he was not morally responsible for setting your house on fire. You cannot have your rapist put in prison because he did not choose to rape you. You cannot put the murderer in prison because he did not choose to murder. You cannot arrest the thief because he did not choose to steal. And so the police are all unnecessary because nobody makes decisions.
See, it's not what we're saying at all, Ronnie.
No, I'm taking what you said, and maybe you've said it in such a way that I don't fully understand it, but from what I understand, which is to say that you're not morally responsible for what you do, and therefore should not be held morally responsible for what you do since you aren't, then that's how it follows. That's the logic that does follow.
Ronnie, there's a in the mental health system, for example, psychiatrists, psychologists recognize, for example, like somebody may have Tourette's syndrome or something.
Tourette's,
sorry. And they just like shout out obscenities, and it's not under their control. right? So like,
Tourette's syndrome is what's called an exception to the rule, but it is
well,
not the rule itself.
all right, let's say alcoholism, right? Alcoholism
Is a disease.
is a disease. So in other words, like, so it's not like an alcoholic can do what they want, because we have to uphold rules and laws and order. So like we may have to kind of like, you know, if
Yes, but a
an
rule and a
alcohol,
law and order is not going to stop an alcoholic,
all right,
because an alcoholic is sick.
Ronnie, my point is, like, within the mental health profession, people can't just do whatever they want, you know, even though it's acknowledged that they don't, you know, they didn't choose their illness. So in other words, like, you know,
But an
this
illness
idea.
is again an exception to a rule and
All
not
right,
a
Ronnie, just stop. Try to not interrupt. You know, let me finish my thought.
okay.
So basically, you know, within the mental health profession, you know, doctors recognize that people don't choose to, let's say, become depressed or to become angry or to become anxious, but you know, people act, you know, in ways that are we quote unquote hold them responsible. We don't fundamentally hold them responsible, but in other words, like the rules and the laws that we impose are based on a pragmatic need to maintain order, to have rules and laws that benefit everyone. They're not based on moral judgment. They're based on simple, you know, a necessity based on civilization.
The laws are based on some moral judgments. For example, murder is illegal because murder is morally wrong.
Yeah,
I
but
know.
the real reason why we have that law in the first place is because these actions have consequences on people. People suffer a loss of loved ones.
But if nobody can choose to perform an action, then why would you punish them for performing an action
Because we don't want
if
to
they
suffer.
couldn't choose to do it in the first place?
No, because in psychology, like, we are conditioned to seek pleasure and avoid pain, and we understand that we respond to reward and punishment. You know, in psychology, there might be an experiment, and it doesn't have to do with free will at all. But psychologists know that if they reward subjects for a certain behavior, the subjects would be more likely to repeat the behavior. And if the subjects are punished for a certain behavior, you know, the subjects are less likely to behave in it. And the same goes for deterrence. So it's not about free will. It's about, like, people understanding the consequences of what we do, and then just basically society imposing rewards and punishments to kind of guide our behaviors in certain ways. And
I mean, we
there
don't
is,
think,
But the thing is that we have more people in prison for repeat offenses than we have for first-time offenses. So the
no,
punishment clearly isn't working. And if
Yeah,
people
well,
can't choose to do the action in the first place, then the punishment nor the reward is going to make a difference.
well, you know, here's an interesting thing: is there's a truth in what you say there, Ronnie, because if the fundamental reasons and causes that lead them to do a certain thing are not changed, then deterrence alone isn't enough. They need to be reformed and re-educated. You know, that's a very important thing, because, and basically the reason for why people, you know, it's not so much about them punishing criminals, it's about jailing them to prevent them from doing it again and hurting other people, because it's predictable that somebody who murders, they expect them to murder again, you know, or rape or whatever the case may be, and that's the reasoning behind it. But we understand it's not an actual punishing the person as though they deserve it, but just a practical measure of society.
So a rapist doesn't deserve to be in prison?
Correct.
well, yeah, rapist doesn't deserve to go to hell. Doesn't We don't deserve, and we don't, like,
And I'm
we
not
do
saying hell. I'm simply saying prison.
no, absolutely. And like, when we do something good, we don't really quote unquote deserve fundamentally to be rewarded.
they
But
hurt people.
Well,
it's
human
again,
beings don't deserve anything, so.
it's exactly, it's a convention. Desert is a convention, basically, because we don't have a free will. In other words, we can't take credit for the good we do, and we can't fundamentally blame ourselves or other for the bad. But again, pragmatically, because we're hardwired to seek pleasure and avoid pain, and because we respond well to rewards and punishments, that's why we impose these laws and these rules.
Exactly,
But we
George.
clearly don't respond well to rewards and punishments because, again, we have so many repeat offenders. People who go to prison, who come back out
That
and do
just shows
something
that
again.
rehabilitation system
If
in
the
its
punishment was supposed to work, if people responded to punishment, if anybody responded to punishment in such a way that it was effective, then we wouldn't have so many repeat offenders, and people would probably learn to do what's right.
no, but
However, I think the
a lot
problem
of it has
more
to do with lack of
is
understanding of neuroscience and psychology. That's the
Yeah.
truth.
See, what we're saying, Ronnie, is that we need to go beyond the deterrence. We need to go beyond reward and punishment because it's
teach
not effective
self-destruct.
enough. That's the thing is we're talking about re-education. We're talking about getting to the root causes that lead people to do things.
I can't remember the documentary, but there was a documentary I saw on psychopaths a while back, and they said that they found genes associated with violent offending. It's the so-called warrior gene. Ever heard of it, George?
No, absolutely. And you know, even some academics have this gene, but their upbringing, you know, from a good family with good standards and all, has kind of like prevented them from expressing that gene in a criminal way. So like it's a predisposition, it's not an exact, you know, condition that the person will behave a certain way.
So if there is such a gene that will determine, say, violence or harmful behavior toward others, what do we do when we find out that an infant has been found has that gene? What do we do? Now they're
Mm.
genetically predisposed to
Right.
violent behavior. What do we do?
Well, I mean, if we theorize, if we like obtain
Do we
data.
kill the infant?
No, but if we have genetic engineering that we can
But if we
engineer
don't have
that trait
that, all
out.
we have right now is the knowledge that the gene might exist. So,
Right.
so
No,
if
I
we
don't
don't
think.
have that, what do we do?
Well, I think we would, in other words, like since the gene isn't a complete predisposing factor, that environmental effects also affect the adult's behavior, then I think we'd be wise to put those children in an environment very conducive to upholding the law. You know, we want to be very careful with that population to not like neglect them and to not like put them in environments that would cause them to commit
So if they
crimes.
were put in the right environment, they would be fine.
That's one
That's
answer.
the idea.
If that's the case, then their genetics didn't matter in the first place.
Well,
Well,
it,
again,
it it still does make a difference, but the point is that biology plus environment
Well,
are
it's more
both
like
required.
environment can top biology, is what you're saying.
Correct. We're not saying that everything is biologically determined. That would be insane. That would be like
Right.
saying
That
that
yeah, that would be false.
yeah, yeah, because
And it's true. It's true that we have biological and environmental factors that go into who we are. However, it is also true that we are able to overcome these things. You hear about these, these sorts of stories all the time. I grew up in an abusive household, but I'm perfectly fine. These people can change. They can change, but the first thing that you have to do to change is want to change and make the decision to change. And you couldn't do that if you couldn't make decisions at all.
yeah,
Actually, the reason why these people change is because they recognize they have a problem. People who don't recognize they have a problem won't
It's
change.
not just, yes, they have to recognize they have a problem, but then they have to choose to change the problem, to fix the problem. And again, they couldn't choose to fix the problem if they couldn't choose anything to
Well,
begin.
they have to be influenced to choose. They can't just choose
Yes,
from
they have
nowhere.
to
Yeah,
decide themselves.
yeah, but there'll be a
Someone
reason
else
why
can
that.
make you decide to do something.
Well, I don't
well,
know
see,
about that,
here's
but I
the
mean
They
that.
can try.
well,
Yeah,
actually, Ronnie, I highly disagree because if you put somebody into a situation that forces them to make a decision, then basically, no matter what their decision is, you cause them to do it. And that's a very important thing that has to be understood.
Can you give me an example
Well,
of a situation like that?
okay, here's a good example, if you don't mind me using abortion as an example.
Go ahead.
Because basically, if okay, let's just take an interesting example. Let's say that a man rapes a woman and she gets pregnant. Okay.
Okay.
Well, here's the deal. Regardless of your feelings on abortion, whatever she does, whether she raises the child, whether she gives it up for adoption, or whether she aborts the child, no matter what she does, she was not the first causer that led to her pregnancy anyway.
You know what she is the cause of, and that's true. But you can't just work on a basic foundation. You have to go a little bit beyond that because, like you said, it's more than just biology and environment, and it's a little bit more than that too. So now we know that she's pregnant. Now we know that she's pregnant. Now she has the free will to decide how she's going to end, or to keep, or to put that child up for adoption.
Well, see,
That
here's
is her choice. Based
well,
on her limitations and the situation, that is her choice. And that's how we make choices, based on our limitations and
well,
based on our situations.
But Ronnie, we're not in control of our limitations. We don't
That's
create
okay.
ourselves. No. In other words, like if we're not in control of our limitations, and our limitations are causing our choice. Something that's not in our control is causing our choice. So like this
What do you
notion
mean
of free
something that, how is, you, like I said, you have to work within your, like, let's say you have a piece of paper. You have to work, and you have to work within the boundaries of the piece of paper. Or let's say you have a canvas and you want to paint. You have to paint within the boundaries of the canvas if you want a painting on canvas. You can't go outside of the boundary. It doesn't work like that. But when you paint on the canvas, you're definitely painting, you're definitely choosing your strokes, and you're definitely choosing your picture.
But Ronnie, even if we're within the canvas, whatever we do within the canvas is caused. So
By
like
you.
as soon as you introduce causality, you introduce this chain of cause and effect that regresses back to before we were born. And as soon as we do that, all of a
But
sudden,
no, we don't have to go back. The fact is that you pick up that paintbrush and you decide where that first stroke is going, and you decide where the next stroke is going.
I know, but what our point is that you decide because of a cause, a reason, something makes you decide, and then there's a cause to that cause, and a cause to that cause, and these causes are always going
But
back
it,
in
but
time.
even if there is a cause to all of these things, and life, it is true that life regresses back so far, but even if there is a cause, the fact is that you do make decisions.
But it won't be free. It won't be a free choice.
But
If
you
there's
have a
a if
choice
there's
to not make the decision too, which is and that's what the free choice is.
but only if something causes you not to make that decision that's outside
No,
of your
you have
control.
to do it, not something else. You.
The thing,
No,
that's what we're saying, is that it's never we or us that decides it, but the situation and
So
the
we're gonna
combination of biology and
then
environment.
tell me who, with an artist. Let's say he has a paintbrush, and he says, "I'm gonna paint a tree." He's decided to he chose to paint the tree. Now
But
I want you to tell me
this person's acting based
which
on their
hand he's gonna pick up the. Actually, that's not the right word to use. I want you to be able to tell me who decides that is not him to paint the first stroke. If you
okay,
can't make the
He's using
decision, tell me who
information.
did.
the
He's using
the
information he
the
received.
tree did. Let's just say it to
Make the
simplify
decision,
it. Let's just say that the guy, in order to paint a tree, has to have the idea of a tree, and
which
so
he has to make.
they've seen a tree. I mean, everything that is fictional is based off of something not fictional. Everything that we can draw, anything, has to be based on something that we've experienced, some cause that led to the thought to even draw a tree.
Well, right, there has to be a tree in order for you to want to draw a tree. That's just definition right there. But
Yes.
that doesn't tell me who decided for him, because he didn't decide, because he can't decide, because he has no free will. Who
Well,
Well,
decided for him
Ronnie, here's
to
where
make
we
the
get
first
like
stroke?
there's a part of this that actually transcends logic. In other words, like in terms of who, if we're naturalistic, if we're
Okay, who or
scientists,
what?
all right, so basically, like if we're scientists, we would attribute it to the universe, but that's problematic because like we could attribute it to the Big Bang, but then logic tells us that there was something that caused the Big Bang to happen. In other words, like what we're saying is like this chain of cause and effect that regresses back behind every decision and every
Well,
act we do. Ronnie, let me finish.
okay.
Um, the chain of cause and effect never stops going back. According to our logic, it doesn't have a beginning. So, in terms of like asking who or what, we just the only thing we could say is that it's the chain of cause and effect. Now, what initiated that cause and effect? This is we're asking a question regarding what happened before the Big Bang. So we can't answer that question, but we can certainly answer the question that the chain of cause and effect regressed back to before we were born, and that's what renders free will impossible. Something that happened before we were born causes us to decide as we did.
All right. Well, that's I don't think that it's true that we don't have a beginning, because everything has a beginning. A book has a beginning. The building of a computer has a beginning. The making of a canvas has a beginning. A sandwich has a beginning.
It cannot be a book without an author.
So, yes, that's true. But the author is not the book. The author writes the book.
And then it
there's
gets
only
into
always one first word in the book. There is only always one first. If
Well,
there
see-
is a second first, then it's not a first.
Ronnie, but you're right. But there's like everything within the universe, and then there's the universe itself. You know, you're right. You're right. Everything after the Big Bang has a beginning, and as a matter of fact, the Big Bang is the beginning of the quote unquote observed universe. But again, logic. You know, our logic says, well, you know, how did the Big Bang arise? How could like something just arise from
Come out
nothing?
from nothing.
And that's where our logic, you know, can't answer that.
Actually, I think
Kev,
reasoning can answer
just
that. You can have a reasonable answer.
see,
God,
Ronnie,
Christians, Jews, and all that stuff. They made the assumption that there was a creator before the universe. They made the assumption that God said, "Let there be light," and that the universe expanded from nothing. And that was just an assumption because we have no evidence for it.
Chandler, how are we doing on
Let there
time?
be light could have
well,
been.
we are over our 30 minutes, but
Oh,
this
okay.
is so important that I really want us to finish this because this
Absolutely.
is yeah.
Absolutely. Chandler, guys, go as long as you want because it's an excellent discussion. I just have to get going. So like I'll talk to you guys again next Saturday and Sunday.
All right. Look
Okay,
forward
it's
to it.
nice talking to you guys.
Okay. Bye.
You too.
Yeah. See, Ronnie, the reason that this podcast, that both our Free Will Science and Religion podcast, as well as the one we're doing now, Impersonal Opinion, is so important is because once you start questioning something, it leads to more questions, and there's more questions. There's always more discussion to be had. And that's what's so great about this, because there are many paradoxes, and we started this by talking about paradoxes, and what we're saying is, there is a paradox, and one of the examples of a paradox is the idea of a beginning. Because if you say there was a beginning to the universe, well, then what began the beginning? And if you say that
itself.
What?
The beginning itself.
So, like, here's the deal. So you're saying the beginning itself began itself.
Yes. The beginning can't have another beginning. If there is another beginning, then it's not a beginning.
Right. And see, here's what's interesting is we don't blame each other for disagreeing on this. And that's a very important point.
And I'm not judging you for disagreeing with me. I'm just simply trying to move the conversation forward.
Yes, totally. But I'm just saying, yeah, and I don't judge you either because I can't, because you didn't decide to have the opinion you do. That's what's interesting, because no matter, like, every belief that we have, every opinion we have is not something that we just got out of nothing. We didn't just decide I'm going to have this opinion. It's, for example, I've often said to people, well, I didn't choose to become pro-life, and it's a very important thing, because there's always prior causes, including the level of empathy in somebody's brain and the way they were raised and their genes and all this sort of stuff that's outside of their control. And so here's the deal. Today, I no longer blame anybody at the time for having the opinion that they have, because I understand that there's reasons and causes that led them to have that opinion. And obviously, everybody disagrees on something. I've never seen two people who agree on every subject. And it's interesting because, take, for example, I used to blame people. I used to judge and blame people and want to punish people. But I now have this new understanding that no one's to blame, but it's not, but my motivation is not to make anybody suffer. I'm not trying to punish anybody. I just want to do whatever I can to re-educate people to
Yeah,
be less harmful.
and I don't blame Muslims, Jews, and Christians for making the assumption that there was a creator, before the universe. I don't blame them for that at all. What I'm saying is that saying that there's a creator without evidence, that by definition is an assumption.
Yeah, and
It's
see
a
what.
faith because you can't know it. Or,
Yeah,
well, and you really can know it in a way, but not in a way that a lot of people will accept, I'm sure.
well, it's kind of an interesting thing because, like Jamie said, I don't blame somebody for believing in a god or a creator or a first cause. And what's interesting about it is I understand that their brain is wired in such a way through whatever the combination, whether how much is biological and how much of it is environmental, is really hard to know. But some people are wired with the idea of a first cause. Their brain, it just makes sense to them that there had to be a beginning to all things. And someone like me simply didn't choose to have a brain that, like, well, what began the beginning, and what began the beginning of the beginning, and the infinite
You
regress.
can't begin the beginning of a beginning. I mean, the beginning of the beginning, or the beginning of the beginning is the beginning itself.
Well, it's so funny because this is exactly why philosophy is so crazy, because everybody has different ideas of on topics like about the beginning of the universe. People have different ideas about what's moral or immoral, and that's why I'm more of a philosopher. I like to get down to the moral things about, well, for example, somebody says, killing is wrong, which I agree, but I'm like, well, why is killing wrong? You
But
know,
philosophy isn't just morality.
well, I know it includes all sorts of other topics like whether people believe in God or a soul or a beginning to the universe or dualism versus monism. There's all kinds of philosophical
Yes.
topics which involve all kinds of paradoxes. And that's what's
They're all
great.
fun.
It's a lot of fun. So, Ronnie, I hope you're enjoying talking with us about these paradoxes.
I do. I'll send you a paper that I read that was really very good. It's a good philosophical paper.
Interesting. Yeah, because a lot of philosophy goes straight over my head. I mean, and I think that happens with everybody. And like people say some stuff that's like, wow, and then there's other stuff like, I think, therefore I am, and I'm like, okay, well, I mean, yeah, I kind of get that idea,
Understand what that means?
Yeah, it's
What he meant when he said that?
Well, yeah, it was from what I understand is like he's like, well, I'm thinking something, and so he's like, well, if he's thinking, then he's conscious, he's aware, and so he has to sort of exist to be aware. So it's about a question of, I guess, existence, about
Yeah, he
self-existence.
says he sat down and he's like, and if this is if I'm correct, he sat down and he's like, well, I'm gonna I'm gonna take away pretty much everything that I know, and I'm just gonna go down to the basics. Like, how do I know I exist? It's like, well, I can't say that I exist because there's a desk sitting in front of me because I don't know if the desk exists. But then
Right.
he sat there and he said, well, I'm thinking, and because I'm thinking, I must exist. I think, therefore, I am.
And you know what, Ronnie? What I get out of that the most is that the basis of all knowledge is consciousness. That we're aware of something. Because if we weren't conscious, then we wouldn't be having this discussion. Because
I'd be asleep.
yeah, yeah, and so that's the whole point. See, Ronnie, is that I hear all you guys on Skype while we're talking and recording podcasts, and because I can hear you, I know that not only am I do I exist because I'm experiencing something, but I know that these other people it must exist, or where are these noises coming from? So it's about existence and consciousness, and it's all
And there's actually some puzzles about whether or not you actually do exist and whether, well, I should say whether or not this is real. And those are some fun ones. I'll have to send you
Right.
those too.
Well, I know, like for example, Solecism is like where people like can be the Matrix, like where it's all like they create their reality, and that there's nothing that can be known to exist independently of your perception. Which is kind of a weird thought. And then like,
It's yeah, no.
but the idea of a self is interesting because people have different ideas of what the self is, and for a monist like me, um, you know, basically the self is my body, basically probably my brain, or perhaps I don't know to what extent the consciousness might be contained in the other parts, because I mean that's a whole topic right there.
Yeah, that's a huge topic.
It's very huge because I think about it and I think, well, my heart beats and I'm not thinking about my breathing, and my blood cells are doing whatever they're doing, and strain all the bacteria in my gut and all kinds of interesting things. And so it's like, well, which of these things are me and which of these things are not me? And I'm kind of like, well, all of it is connected into this one body at this time. So all of this is me, but me now and me a year from now is not the same me, because food has come in and gone out, and it's free.
Well, right, but I mean that's like saying the seasons change, therefore it's not the same tree, even though the same tree is standing.
Well, it's what's interesting though is understanding like that we're made of atoms, we're made of material, and that we lose our matter and we gain matter back every time we eat, and every time we poop we lose matter, and it's like it's a funny thought because, well, like for example, I think I heard or read somewhere that every 11 years every cell of your body is replaced or something like that. Which is an interesting thought because it's more like the you now are all descendants of the you that was 11 years ago. So it's like, but it's so similar that for practical purposes we refer to them as the same person. But I can tell you one thing: I don't feel like the same person that I was as a teenager, because everything like about me is different, whether the size of the body or the way I think, which is of course in my view the brain, because I don't believe in a immaterial mind, but it's probably the brain that everything I'm saying is processed, and most of it at the level of the unconscious before I'm conscious of what I'm saying.
Yeah, but you could be aware of something and still not be in control. I mean, for example, when we're asleep and we dream or have nightmares, we're not in control of those, but we experience them.
Right.
That's true.
And so this whole
Reality is that human beings are not nearly as in control as they would like to think, but that doesn't mean that they don't have free will.
well, it's,
That doesn't necessarily follow. And I'll have to do some more reading on determinism. Obviously, I'm not very good at articulating myself in this discussion because I'm not that deep into it yet.
yeah.
I can only ask questions and see where I go. So.
And what's interesting about it, Ronnie, is that definitions are very important. And what bothers me, for example, is when people use the same word or set of words to mean the exact, totally different things, but the exact same word. For example, look at what people have done with the word God. Just look at how one person talks about God, they're a Christian, the other's a Jew, the other's a Muslim, the other's some Hindu.
But the
Um,
but the but the definition of God is the same in every single religion, and that is the creator.
But actually, Hindu and other polytheistic type of religions have multiple
Or
gods.
I should have been more clear because you're right. The concept of God is merely higher power.
Right. It's kind of interesting because there in my word web dictionary there's like there's lowercase God and there's uppercase God, and they have different definitions because they mean different things. Like capital God is usually like monotheistic religions. Like there's one God who's the creator, and is omnipotent and omniscient and all that sort of stuff. But then you have like polytheistic gods, like where there's many
Oh, I see what
different
you're saying.
gods. So that's the thing, is it needs to be made a distinction, like, well, do you believe in God? Yes. Well, which God? And then one person's like, what do you mean? There's only one God. But
Well,
the other person, yeah,
it's like have you the word president? Like if you capitalize the word president, then you're referring to the president of the United States or the president of your country. Basically, you're referring to one person. And if you have it lowercase, then you're referring to just the general president. Like it
yeah.
could be any president.
And
There's
what
Like of a corporation or stuff like that. Yeah.
Well, the important thing is, Ronnie, when we talk, we don't see how capitalized something is. When somebody says the word God, we all, it's all filtered through all our prior experiences. So when somebody to me says the word God, what happens is some kind of sadistic torturer who wants to burn you forever. That's what pops into my head as soon as I hear that word. But for somebody else, like
So
George,
you need, when somebody says God to you, then, and if you do not properly understand them, what you need to do is you need to ask.
I agree. I totally
Definitely
agree.
never assume
This
that.
whole thing confuses people because when you mention the word God, some people just assume you're talking about the creator God, not just some other superior being who
A
may
lot of
seem.
a lot of problems is that nobody wants to ask and they want to assume what
And
God means when
that's right.
clearly very very different
And
meaning.
yeah, and see, Ronnie, this is what's good because we're asking each other questions about what we mean about things, and you ask us questions about certain things we're saying, and that's good. I mean, I'm like, I'm very much the question everything type. I'm like, anything you can ask questions about anything, because the reason I'm so much that way has a lot to do with the fact that I was raised in Christianity that's like, don't question God, don't ask questions, just believe. And it's like, well, I have to ask the questions about, well, what am I supposed to believe? And they're like, oh, I don't, just believe, don't believe anything, just believe. And I'm like, well, I have to have something to
Yeah,
believe.
that's silly.
Because they were the Norse gods, what the Vikings believed in. This stuff predated Christianity, didn't it? So
Yeah. And what I learned, and what's great about it is, I started studying other religions, and what really opened my eyes was Hinduism, because like the idea that they all have, like each family has a different god that they've worshipped for generations. And it's interesting because God for them might just be the one, the source, the ultimate reality, or Brahman, or something like that. And I understand that kind of God is not the same as the Christian God necessarily. And then when George, when he talks about God, he just means the universe because he's pantheist. He's like, God literally is the universe. But
or
so
when you talk about materialists like us, we don't believe in any gods. We just believe that the universe has no consciousness and that we exist. That's it. Yeah.
right, and there's a very very small distinction between me as an atheist and George as a pantheist, for example. For him, the universe has a consciousness, from how I've heard him say it before. So,
Mhm.
so that's an interesting thought. But for me, I'm like, well, I don't think the universe has one conscious mind, but I do know that we're conscious. There's multiple living things in this universe. So it's practically, there's not that much of a difference between pantheism and atheism, the way I view it anyway. Um, but yeah, it's good to know when somebody uses a word such as God, or they say free will, or they say afterlife, or any of the controversial topics. It's good to ask them what they mean, because I found out that the word hell has different meanings to different people. Because some people, they refer to hell as the literal torture, burning forever, which is what I was taught. And then some people, by hell, they just mean the grave, or they just mean a place where you're destroyed and you don't exist after that. And some people, by hell, they just use it as a swear word. They use it like, oh, this is a living hell, or like, what the hell, or people use the same word in different ways. And as an autistic person, it really confuses me because language is not my forte.
Yeah, because oh, I forgot what I was going to say now. I lost my train of thought. Oh. If I had a free will, I wouldn't.
Yeah. See, it's interesting because we neither choose the memories in the first place because we don't choose the experiences that lead those memories, but we also can't choose to remember what we want and forget what we want because there's a lot of things I would love to forget, you know, and a lot of things I like to remember.
Totally agreed. There's so many horrible memories I just want to get rid of, but I can't.
Yeah. But Ronnie, I'm so glad you're enjoying this, and you know,
And
yeah, and I'm so glad, you know, that you're enjoying it because see, a lot of times when people talk about these issues, they just get all mad and angry. It's like, you know, and a lot of fighting, it happens over definitions of words. For example, you know, there's within the abortion debate, there's the whole is it a baby or is it a fetus debate when like it's not a baby, it's a fetus. And when somebody says that to me, I'm like, it's not the sun, it's a big flaming ball in the sky.
it's a star.
Yeah, whatever you call it, I'm actually not concerned with the words so much as, well, what do the words mean? I'm like, and so for me, the sun is the same as the star or a big flaming ball in the sky where we get our main light from on Earth. So that's the thing is that for me, like, I actually am very upset that there's so much fighting over what words mean and my solution, like when it comes to God or free will, I like to make distinctions. Well, which God? Which definition of free will? It's definitely good. And you know, because we did, and even though this episode is primarily we started out as being about paradoxes. I mean, it's impersonal opinion. We can have any impersonal opinion, whatever. But we talked so much about free will that, and there are two major distinctions because there's the libertarian kind, which says nothing outside of my control made me do what I do, and then there's compatibilist free will. It's like, well, I'm not really in control, but it's still me doing it, you know. So it sounds just from our talks, it sounds like you're more of a compatibilist, and that even you know that kind of thing. Like even though you didn't create yourself, you still feel like it's you making the choice. Is that an accurate understanding?
As far as that goes, yes,
Yeah, and it always needs to be distinguished because like people and one thing is
I think. I mean,
yeah.
like I said, I'll have to learn more about it and get back to you.
Right. And one thing is, you know, when we talk about how we don't have a free will, then people say, oh, we do have free will. Free will simply means this. And I'm like, well, according to that definition, then yes, we have that kind of free will. But we try to explain that we're talking about libertarian free will, which is kind of the Augustine type of idea, the type of free will that Christians tend to teach, and the reason that that definition is of such importance, primarily for me, is not because I'm picky about people's words, which I am picky about words. Okay, so but it's partly because about the type of free will required to deserve hell. That's my concern because my what I'm saying is nobody deserves to go to heaven or hell, you know, and that's a very important thing because I want to eliminate this fear of hell because whenever people are afraid that they're going to hell, it tends to make them afraid to question things. They try to believe certain things because they're told they have to believe this, and that in order to avoid going to hell. So that's why I'm such a big part of this podcast, you know, why
Which
I
can,
got into
I mean, fear is a major factor in like decision making because when it comes to the abortion debate, right, I don't want to get involved in it because I know what a backlash either side gets. People start accusing each other, calling each other idiots, and other kinds of insults. I mean, if you're for abortion or against abortion, it doesn't matter. It's still a hot topic. It's controversial. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah. And I totally get what you're saying there, Jamie, because it's controversial and
yeah,
because people will say false things about you and people get mad at you when
yeah,
you express an opinion on that topic. Well, that's a good example about how fear motivates you away from a certain behavior. You know, and so I agree totally. Fear is perhaps, it's one of the biggest causes of why people do what they do. But I almost wonder sometimes if it's the most powerful influence. What do you guys think?
Well,
I don't
it's very
know.
nice to know that.
Yeah. I mean, it's like I think Jamie said something earlier about like, well, fear is what helps you survive because if you're afraid of something, then it helps you avoid something which kills you.
Or
So
to fight it.
yeah,
To
either yeah,
fight.
fight or flight response, which of course
Yeah.
requires fear to have any response. You know, so fear is such a big, powerful
But it's also
motivator.
useful.
Yeah,
It's
it's a
pretty good
useful.
to have, actually, because it can save your life. I mean, especially if like someone was chasing you with a knife or something, if someone was trying to rob you.
Yeah, that fear is gonna make you run like twice as fast as what you normally would.
Exactly.
And you better keep running, boy.
And that's
Yeah.
that's an important thing because you know basically those who are more fearful tend to survive better than those who aren't afraid of things that can kill them. So in a certain sense, it's like fear tends to be the greatest motivation, just because you don't reproduce unless you're scared enough to run away from from that which is trying to kill you before you reproduce.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was just gonna mention, I was gonna clarify that into a more simpler, I think, idea, is that fear is just a tool. It's a tool that you can use for a number of different things. It's just a tool.
Yeah, it's a
It's just
tool.
like a shovel or like a hammer.
Yeah, and what's interesting about it is people can use all kinds of, and this is what's sad is that people can threaten you, and scare you into doing certain things, and that's what I'm concerned about because fear is such a powerful motivator. Um, you know, that's why I feel like governments and religions, a lot of people looking to make people do something will use fear. They'll use something to scare them into doing something. And there are things to legitimately be afraid of. I just don't like people being afraid of something if it's not a real threat.
And you shouldn't confuse fear with empathy either, because fear means that you know you you experience emotions. You feel sympathetic towards another person's suffering. That usually stops people from hurting others. But when someone's a psychopath, the part of their brain that controls empathy is not working, so they can't empathize with the suffering of another. And for this reason, they're more likely to make a mistake that can come back on them in future.
Yeah, I mean, fear is very interesting. And like some people say contrast fear with love, and they say like, love is a powerful motivator too. And of course it depends on how you define love because love is another one of those confusing words. And I'm sure you guys are aware of this, that for a lot of people, love is used as a synonym for sex or something like that. Which,
Unlike fear, love is really a tool. I mean, love doesn't do anything actually, and fear doesn't do anything. People do things because of love or fear. It's people doing things. It's not the emotions.
yeah, it's an interesting thing, but think about it. Let's say there were no emotions. Let's say that these emotions didn't exist. Well,
And people would still be doing things,
it's
just
it's
not based on emotion.
well, it's kind of a weird thing because I think we would have all died out by now if there hadn't been fear. For example, if there hadn't been a fear, then things would have just
Well, right.
killed.
Like I said, it's a tool.
Right. And so I think fear is a powerful tool that keeps the species going, as is love. And for me, love, I'm just going to use love as a synonym for, like empathy, like you care about the suffering of somebody else. And so generally you try to avoid somebody being hurt because you wouldn't want to be hurt. And that kind of love for me is the other thing that's required for any society to survive.
Yeah, and the reason why we have a criminal justice system is because humanity has evolved to such a point where we understand that certain behaviors are, harmful to another, and we cannot allow these because these are risk factors. They could come back on us in the future if we don't deal with them.
Yeah. And you know what, guys? There isn't, like, here's the thing is, fear and love are both powerful motivators, but in the end, I don't think they're that different. I think they might be pretty close to equal power because, there's fear, like when
How they're
somebody,
used, like tools.
yeah, that it's interesting. They're both tools and similar. For example, you might love somebody, therefore you do something to save their life or to reduce their suffering, but at the same time, um, it's also a fear. Like they get so mixed together because you love somebody and you're afraid something's going to happen to them, and whether it's you love them or you love yourself, or both, which is ideal, I think. Then it's like, well, yeah, there's a threat, there's a fear because there's a threat to somebody's life. So they're actually so closely together that some people even say that they're just kind of the same thing but reversed, like they're opposites somehow. Yeah. I mean, and we've been talking for over an hour, so we probably will want to end this soon. But did you?
What's an app?
But I mean, we talked about so many good things, and so I think people will enjoy listening to this, and I hope the recording went well. So, was there anything else you guys wanted to say before I just end the recording?
Okay, I don't care what any of you guys say. I'm gonna have the free will to take a nap.
Okay. Yeah. It's interesting, and see, yeah, Ronnie says she has the free will to take a nap, and us determinists say that she was forced to take a nap because she's tired.
Oh, oh, well, that's a fair point. So I'm gonna go submit to my deterministic will.
Yeah, either way, Ronnie's gonna take a nap.
Either way, it doesn't matter why. The nap is
Yeah, yeah, it's been predetermined since the Big Bang that Ronnie would
that
take
Ronnie
it.
would take a nap.
Yeah. Wow. Well, this has been a really good talk, guys. So I guess.
Into determinism more, you'll find it very interesting. Basically, it's just materialism. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
all it is.
Yeah, in a sense, just cause and effect. Everything having some cause. But yeah, I guess if
And
everyone's
again, I'll send you that paper.
okay, yeah, I'll see what that's about. And so, is there anything else anyone still wants to say before I just close out this recording? Or
Oh, don't all speak at once.
yeah,
You can finish it.
yeah, okay. Well, you've been listening to Impersonal Opinion, the show where we don't take our opinions personally. And we've had a lot of opinions today about paradoxes and free will and the origin of the universe and definitions of words and people taking naps and all that fun stuff. So I hope you've enjoyed listening to this as much as we've enjoyed talking about it.
And as much as I enjoy napping.
Yes, as much as Ronnie enjoys napping. So, bye bye.